Shall we start? Okay, sorry for the tech glitch. Good morning and welcome everybody. I'm Irfan Saeed, the Barzani Scholar in Residence and Director of the Global Kurdish Initiative for Peace here at the School of International Service. It's really my pleasure to welcome all of you here. Before I start, I'd like to extend a very welcome to two guests that we have with us, and that is Mr. Trifa Aziz, the Kurdistan Regional Government representative to the United States, and also we have Mr. Najash Shamdin, who is representing the Barzani Endowment. So we are really very delighted to have you with us. You have come all the way from Canada. Thank you so much for coming. Our panel titled Governing Iraq After the Election and the Implication for the Iraq and for Iraq-US relations. In less than 3 weeks, Iraqis are going to the polls for the 6th time after the fall of the former regime to elect 329 members of parliament. It is another big moment for Iraq's political future. This year, there are 7,768 candidates contesting the race, which really means the election will be very, very competitive. And if we're going to compare it to the last election, to 2021, we had close to 7,000 candidates. But in 2018, we had about 3,200 candidates. But what's really interesting about, the election in Iraq, there is some sort of antagonistic nexus between the number of candidates in terms of increase of the candidates that want to win the election or seat in the parliament, and also the voter turnout as well. In the last election in 2021, there were about 36% of voter turnout. So you're talking about a country about 46 million people, some 25 million people who are eligible to vote. In this election, 29 million people, more than 29 million people are eligible to vote. And only according to the Iraqi Independent Commission responsible for holding the election, only 21 million people have registered for vote, and 3.5 billion people have not collected their biometric cards. So only 18 million people are going to vote if they choose to vote on November 11th. So according to some estimates, there might be only 10 million people are going to vote. And if that, we're talking about only probably 31 to 35 people in the best case are going to take part in the election. But we were in Baghdad, I and Kak Sarhan, we spent about 4 days there. Actually, we are very, very fresh. The food still tastes in our mouths. But don't worry, we have got really good food for you as well. We gain some pounds. We want to make sure that you gain also some pounds as well after the event. The politicians that we engaged with, they were very optimistic that there will be a higher turnout than 2021. Whatever their reason was, I really don't know, but probably because of the construction that was going on, probably more people are on the government payroll, lots of social welfare program is going on as well. And also, it was not just those who were at the government, but also those who were even had been kicked out from the government were hopeful that there will be a higher turnout in the election. But what's really important is not just the election, but also what happens after the election, because it doesn't matter how many seats you're going to win in the election, how many votes you're going to get. If you're a party or an election lead, you're participating. But what's important is your ability to form the largest parliamentary bloc after the election. And that means you will be able to convince at least 215 members of the parliament to come to the parliament so that you'll have the quorum, 2/3 of the parliament to elect, for example, the president, and then the government formation is going to kick off. And that's a very complex and very lengthy process if we are going to look at the previous government formation process. It takes us like 1 year. Last one took 1 year at least. So we are going to look at these issues. We are look at what this election means for Iraq's major communities, the Kurds, Shias, and also Sunnis, and how power is going to be shared, how power is going to be reshaped, renegotiated among them, what it means for Iraq's federalism, what it means for the relationship between Kurdistan region and also federal government. As we know, there are lots of issues between them, and some hope that there will be some new of power dynamics, and also the election is going to reset the relationship between them. But more importantly, what this election means for Iraq's regional approach, as well as what it means for its foreign policy, especially what it means for Iraq's relationship with the United States. So we're really lucky to have 3 experts that are going to help us answer these questions. In the interest of time, I'm going to just read very, very brief bios of them, and I'm going to start with Ambassador Rand because she's really far away from Lebanon, and she has been so kind to join us all the way, and it's evening there, I'm sure. Ambassador Rand is a leading expert on Iraqi politics. She's currently a non-resident senior fellow with the Iraqi Initiative of the Atlantic Council. She served as Iraq's first ambassador to the United States from 2003 to 2005, following the fall of the former Iraqi dictator. Ambassador also is the former president and co-founder of the Iraq Foundation, a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit organization promoting democracy, human rights, and civil society in Iraq. And on my left, we have Dr. Serhan Hamasaid, who has over 2 decades of experience working on governance and peace building in Iraq and the Middle East, and also North Africa, from 2011 through 2025. He worked at the U.S. Institute for Peace, where he served as the director of Middle East programs. From 2008 to 2009, he was the Deputy Director General of the Council of Ministers of the Kurdistan Regional Government of Iraq. And we have, from far left, Jennifer Gavito. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Most importantly, she's an SIS alumnus. So welcome back to SIS. And also Ms. Aziz, also an American alumnus as well. So now you can see why people are coming to study at SIS. Probably we should also renounce our education and come re-educate ourselves as American. So Jennifer is a senior advisor at the Cohen Group and co-leads its Middle East practice, a career senior foreign service officer with over 25 years of experience. She previously served as acting principal deputy assistant secretary of state for Near Eastern affairs, and as deputy assistant secretary for Iraq and Iran press and public diplomacy. Jennifer held senior roles with the National Security Council and the Department of Defense, and also was nominated in 2024 by President Biden to serve as the U.S. ambassador to Libya. So welcome, all of you, and let's get started, and I'm going to see you there as well. So thank you so much again for joining us here at the SIS. Since we came back from Iraq, and don't think just because we are both Kurds, that's why I'm going to start from him. That's not the case. We came back from Iraq, and I thought it's like, appropriate just for you to give us some insights about what are the main issues people really care about, the position we engaged with, focus on, and how this election might be different from the previous ones.
Well, still technically good morning and good afternoon to Ambassador Under Rahim. Thank you, Dr. Yerevan. It's an absolute honor to be here at the American University and at the School of International Service, and to be in part of a panel with two very distinguished diplomats, one in the Iraqi diplomacy and in American diplomacy, and to be here with Ms. Rifa and the Barzani Foundation representative, and also Mr. Jalil, the Deputy Chief of Mission of the Iraqi Embassy, and the audience here. Looking at the elections, I think it is an important elections, as you rightfully mentioned, 20 years after Iraq adopted its new constitution in 2005. And what change will it deliver? Like beauty, the answer is in the eye of the beholder. And if we can put this in some context, the context of the elections, the mechanics of the elections, the output of the elections, and what change it may bring as a result. Context, the Middle East, Iran is in significant retreat, pushed back. Israel is seen as the dominant actor in the Middle East domain and influencing things. That brings concern to the Iraqis. They feel that there is an Israeli and American hammer hanging over the head of Iraq in terms of when some groups might be attacked, and they are anticipating another attack on Iran. Whether that is true or not, that is the perception that is weighing in heavy all over the politics of Iraq. And there are those who believe that this elections will not happen and it will be disrupted the last minute because of something. But all the indicators that I have seen on the ground is that the preparation for the elections are happening full swing. The political leadership, the electoral candidates are really actively campaigning and preparing for these elections. And they are trying to present it as another opportunity similar to 2005 opportunity. Okay, violence is behind us, instability is behind us, ISIS is behind us. This is a new opportunity for a re-energized political process. Will it happen? There is some excitement and there's some doubt. Excitement, to your question that you raised in your introductory remarks, why people expect a higher turnout. So the top leadership expects a higher turnout compared to the previous recent elections where turnout was low. They give two indicators as a measure of that. One, that they say about 5 million people, new people, have registered as voters. So they take that as a positive. And the second indicator is that how many people have actually collected their physical cards, another indicator you talked about. So they see those two are up, and those 5 million people are from Iraq's younger generation. So they hope that this will result in higher turnout. We'll have to see. So as a function of governance and democracy, holding the 6th elections in Iraq is important. As a peace builder, I see that as a good sign when you see trouble in Syria and Yemen and Lebanon and Libya. So Iraq, I think, it has, at least at the mechanics, has kept steady meeting the constitutional timelines and doing the elections. Then, in terms of the quality of the process, There is doubt among some Iraqis that the process will be clean because this probably is the least internationally monitored election of Iraq since the adoption of the constitution. The Iraqis try to celebrate that as the Iraqis were actively participating in the elections, I should say, try to celebrate that as a sign of Iraq owning its process. And those who are detractors say, no, this is probably open space for manipulation. So we'll have to see how the process works. What results it will produce, the elections, there's a general expectation it will be about the same. It is the same group of people who are parties and leaders who are competing in the elections. Therefore, some seats may shift this way or that way, but the outcome, they argue, is not going to change. People's demands for services, for jobs, for reform, for fighting corruption will not be addressed as the general public sees it. But it does not have to be that way. And that's where I conclude. I'm happy to unpack some of this further as we discuss. We have some variables. Yes, Sayyid Muqtada Sadr is not participating. He's asked his followers to boycott, and that's a significant constituency. But up till the last minute, he could change his mind and he could steer the election in a different direction and change some electoral balances. Prime Minister Soudani, if he wins a significant margin of elections, he could be a game changer, and he's a reform-minded person. He would have more political clout to influence some change. The Kurds and the Sunnis in this more American activism in the region, they have regained confidence that actually they may be able to push back on some agendas in Baghdad, and that this may turn out positively for them. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Kirk Thanang. I think you set, the tone very well, and also lots of thought to unpack. I'll go to Ambassador Rand, and I'll ask a question based on what Kirk Serhang said regarding the boycott by Muqtada Sadr and how that might influence, the election first. So we're talking about at least 1 million voters that might not join the process, and what implication it might have for the post-election coalition horse rating, and also how that might impact governance in Iraq. You have gone to Iraq, you have trained Iraqi, MPs, you have involved in lots of all these processes, but when you look at the parliament, it probably the more votes we have, the more dysfunctional the parliament becomes. Do you see we are going to see something more positive coming out of this?
Yeah. First of all, I'd like to comment. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be with you, Yerevan, and I want to say hi to my friend Serhag and Jan. Good to see you at 6,000 miles away. I also would like to say hello to my friend Nijar Shamdeen, and again from a distance. Hopefully, pretty soon I'll be able to see you face to face. Anyway, thank you very much for having me. I want to comment a little bit on a couple of things that Serhang said. This issue of a greater turnout on these elections, I am not sure I agree with that. There is a great grassroots movement to boycott the elections. And of course, this movement is led by Muqtada Sadr. He has been the most vocal about the necessity to boycott the elections because the elections are not free and fair, because the system is corrupt, because the people who are running for election and who are in government are corrupt. So there is a strong tendency among people that I hear and I read about to boycott the elections. I am not sure how the turnout will be. And this is particularly true, by the way, in the center and the south, Baghdad and south of Baghdad, which have a majority Shia population. It may well be that in the Sunni areas and in the Kurdish areas, the turnout will be higher. And from what I have been observing, the Sunnis are far more motivated than the Shia to vote. This is partly Muqtada Sadr's influence, which is considerable, as you know, and partly because certainly the Shia feel that what they have had for 23 years or 22 years is a Shia state, a Shia government. And yet, this very Shia government has not delivered to them, not delivered services, not, it hasn't been an honest government. It has not been a government that has worried about the people. They have enriched themselves. So the anger of the Shia is particularly with Shia representatives and the Shia government. And of course, there's no way of predicting. And I hear that 5 million more people have registered to vote and so on. I would want to know where those 5 million, additional 5 million people are from. And also the pool of potential voters is larger because, as you know, the population of Iraq increases by 1 million per year. So since the last elections, it has already increased by 4 million, and more people are coming of age. So I think this is a question mark. And the problem is, of course, even if you have a turnout of 20%, you will still have a parliament, which is legitimate, as it were, and then a government. But if the turnout is low, it really indicates a serious lack of trust in government. And although it's legal to have a parliament, but the actual legitimacy of representation is going to be enfeebled. So, Sarhang, this is my comment on this, because I do feel there's a lot of malaise, and I look at the Shia electorate principally rather than the Sunni and Kurdish, and I do find that malaise very strong. So essentially, are the elections going to make any change in policy? There will be, it is likely that there will be a change in the dynamics of power in Parliament, because largely because we are talking about a greater number of seats for Prime Minister Sudani. In 2021, in the elections of 2021, he only had 2 seats in Parliament. Now, notice he had 2 seats in Parliament, and yet he became Prime Minister, which is an interesting observation if you think about it. This time, he is likely to get somewhere between 40 and 50. Now, this may actually be a Shiite plurality. It doesn't guarantee him a second term as prime minister, but it does mean that he will have much more influence on decision making and policy making. The other issue after the elections is that Iraq is being buffeted by regional changes. Now, the matter of Iran's declining power has been mentioned. The change in Syria has been very considerable. The decimation of Hezbollah is a very important factor. The fact that you have a Trump administration that is much more hardline than the Biden administration was, and has already put a lot of pressure on Iraq. But in both good ways and bad ways. And for example, I think that the resumption of oil exports from Kurdistan would not have likely happened had it not been pressure from the Trump administration. On the negative side, if you want, is the pressure that has come on the government and on Parliament to withdraw the PMF law. The fact that there have been many, many more sanctioned companies and individuals and political entities under the Trump administration than there was in the past. So there is a lot of pressure on the body politic of Iraq. And I think what we will see after the elections is that a lot of this pressure that has been building up is going to translate into different policies, different foreign policy, for example, different internal policies. And with the changes in the in the shift of power of some of the blocs, some weakening, some strengthening, probably also a strengthening of the Kurdish and the Sunni blocs at the expense of the Shia seats. I think there we will have a different dynamic in parliament, which will lead to different types of decision making. I'll stop there and we'll continue.
Thank you very much for the insights. I'm kind of agree with you because if we are looking at the number of the independent candidates actually participating, trying to win a seat compared to the previous one, 25% of the in 2021, 25%, the makeup was 25%. In this election, it is less than 1% makeup of total candidates. You know, they were all co-opted or they switched sides to Prime Minister Soudani or they joined, you know, the other major blockers of election leaders. And that tells you there will be lots of voter, you know, apathy, and also there is already lots of this illusionment, which might reflected in the election and also less voter participations in the election. Jen, let me come to you and ask about how the administration might see this election. Is it going to be a turning point? Is it going to be seen just as another political cycle in Iraq? Do you see any difference?
I mean, first of all, like everyone else, I just want to say what a pleasure it is to be with this panel with some of my favorite colleagues from my time from within government. Ambassador Rend, we're looking forward to you getting back to Washington in due course. And it's especially a thrill to be back here at SIS. I was a graduate in 1997 and then in the master's program in international development thereafter before joining the Foreign Service. And it remains one of my favorite places. So thanks for having me today. So to your question, Yerevan, I think that, you know, first of all, that is first and foremost a question for the Iraqis. If this is a turning point, if it's not a turning point, that depends entirely on what comes out of that election. I feel like we were just doing this. 2021 seems like just yesterday that we were having these discussions about the last election and what the credibility of it would be. And I recall at the time, again, from inside government, a lot of questions about what the U.S. position was going to be. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't convince anyone that the United States did not actually have a position on the election, other than to say that we looked forward to it being free and fair. And we're in fact gratified that despite relatively low voter turnout in that year, that they were the most technically credible elections that had taken place in Iraqi history. And so I do think it's important for Iraqis to remember that there has been an evolution and a fairly positive one that should be celebrated. And so it's disheartening to hear Muqtada al-Sadr and his followers choose to boycott because, you know, of course, we know that the only way to make a government more accountable is by more participation in the process. But a very long-winded way of saying, again, that what comes out of this election and what the U.S. response to it is depends entirely on what the voters decide and what the government formation process ultimately looks like. What the U.S. will be looking for, though, are a lot of the same things that Iraqis are looking for, and that is a government that is accountable to its people, that is the Iraqi people, and to no other power, to include the United States, but certainly Iran. It's nice being out of government where one can say that very abruptly and not dance around it. And then, of course, you know, a government that defends the sovereignty of Iraq, that works with international partners to protect that sovereignty, and again, deliver services in a credible way to the population. I think those are fundamentally the things that the United States is looking for out of this. It is, though, a difficult moment for the region. I just came back last week from the Med Dialogues in Naples, where there was a gathering of leaders from across Europe and the Middle East. And one of the things that was most striking to me was that everybody that we heard from Middle Eastern countries, to include Iraq, talked almost exclusively about regional dynamics and very little about what was happening domestically. And it is a reminder that all of those pressures that we've already talked about, whether it is Hezbollah, whether it is the 12-day war between Israel and Iran, whether it is what has happened in Syria over the last year, all of that plays so heavily into how Iraq views its own future. And so I do think that there is a reality that the U.S. administration has to grapple with, that Iraq is in a lot of ways beholden to those regional events, and that is challenging. I will note that I have heard a shift over the last couple of months, however, from the Trump administration when it comes to talking about Iraq. And there was, in fact, what I would call a pretty belligerent attitude towards Iraq at the beginning of the Trump administration. A lot of criticism, not just of the pipeline issues and the lack of exports, which for whatever reason were really driving how a lot of people in the administration were viewing Iraq, but also certainly the continued reliance on Iran, both for energy, but also just politically. And in conversations with members of the administration over the last month or two, I have noticed a palpable change in that, in the direction of understanding that Iraq's success is really key to the U.S. success in the region, and a stable Iraq serves as a stabilizer for a lot of the broader objectives that this administration has. And we saw that from the Gulf, right? When there was conflict between Iran and Israel, when the strike on Doha happened, that puts in jeopardy a lot of this administration's objectives. And so I think that moving forward, assuming that these elections take place, that they take place in a technically credible way, and that the government formation process moves forward in not too long of a time frame, I think that there will be a greater willingness by this administration to work with the Iraqi government in pursuit of some of those objectives that we talked about.
Thank you, Jen. Before my next question, I think you wanted to have some response to what the ambassador said.
Yes, on turnout. So my own personal assessment is not different from what the ambassador said or what you said. In my opening remarks, being bound to 5 minutes, I kept it short. I was just responding to your question. You said I did not understand, and you're right, that political leadership says turnout will be higher, and I was just explaining what are the reasons why they say the elections, the turnout will be higher, which is more registration, more card pickup, and younger participants. My own personal assessment is that I have not seen any indication of enthusiasm at the public level for participation. Actually, quite the contrary. I could add more to the bleak picture you both laid out. So that was just, I want to make sure there's not a misunderstanding there.
Okay, thank you. Ambassador, I want to come back to you. And as you know, the Iraq's internal politics is very fragmented, and that often reflected its foreign policy. How do you think this election might reflect it on that, especially when it comes to the U.S.-Iraq foreign relations? You are muted. Can you please unmute yourself?
Sorry. The question of foreign policy formulation is a difficult one in Iraq, because in most other countries, the government the government is sovereign, the government works together, and the government formulates foreign policy together. And there is a certain consensus as to what is in the best interest of the entire nation, what is the best national interest in terms of foreign policy. Now, They may be wrong, they may be right, foreign policy may change, but at any one point, it represents a consensus of opinion within that government. Okay. In Iraq, it's a little bit different. The Iraq has a fragmented foreign policy approach. We have a government that formulates foreign policy, and yet we have factions within the state or groups within the state that have a different view of what Iraq's foreign policy should be. And the government, whether it is the prime minister or the ministers or the foreign minister indeed, have the very difficult task of reconciling a number of disparate views and disparate attitudes about what is best for Iraq in terms of foreign relations, and coming up with a hybrid, if you want. I mean, there are many examples we can give foreign policy or relations with Iraq. There are several different views of what Iraq's relationship with Iran should be. And I won't go into that because it's very obvious. Turkey, again, Turkey is a matter of sort of a difference among the groups. Syria now is a very important, contentious foreign policy issue. This present government has been conciliatory towards the new Syrian regime. They have tried to build bridges, create contacts. There's even talk about a pipeline that goes through Syria. And yet, there is a whole constituency in Iraq which regards the new Syrian regime as a rogue regime led by remnants of Qaeda and ISIS and so on, and therefore we should not deal with it. This is a very important case that is occurring right now. Another one that has existed over the last 20 years is Iraq's relationship with the Arab world, and particularly with the GCC. Again, it seems self-evident on the face of it that Iraq should have excellent relations with its Arab neighbors and with the larger Arab community of nations. And yet again, there are some people, or not just people, but there are some groups in Iraq, some ethnic groups, religious groups, who feel that relations with the Arab world should be at arm's length. Okay, so this whole notion of a unified, unitary foreign policy that is formulated by the state in the national interest with a national consensus is, in my view, absent. Now, what is going to happen in the future? Parliament itself doesn't formulate foreign policy. It is the government that formulates foreign policy. But Parliament can influence, it can question, it can lead, it can, and so on. What I think is going to affect foreign policy most of all is what is happening in the region. Are we going to have good relations with Syria? How are our relations with Turkey going to be? What about Turkish troop presence in northern Iraq? Our relations with the Arab world are strengthening. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Should we continue with that? It's really the environment that is going to force itself to us. Unfortunately, and speaking as a former diplomat, I have seen that Iraq foreign policy has never been proactive. It has always been reactive. Something happens and we have to react to it. And our reactions are sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes confused. But, you know, and this is the whole notion of developing something that is in the national interest with national consensus has been lacking. And I do not see that there may be changes on the margins. Yes, if there are changes in Parliament that affect the sort of balance of power among groups, yes, it could affect foreign policy, but I think not in a dramatic way. It has to come from elsewhere.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now, let's focus on internal relations. which really impacts, Iraq's foreign relations, and especially the federal dynamic is between the Kurdistan regional government and also the federal government. We are going to an election, and still there are lots of tensions, lots of outstanding issues between the KRG and Baghdad when it comes to oil, comes to budget as well. How do you see these results as might impact this issue? The question is really for Dr. Sahar and also for Jen as well, because Jen, you probably worked on these issues or dealt with this issue when you worked at the state.
Yeah, I think unpacking what has been some of the challenges, whether domestic or in foreign affairs. Ambassador Rund said, okay, well, she unpacked the policy, okay, it's not in parliament, it's in government, and government is reactive, not proactive. Obviously, I can imagine some of the diplomats and the top leadership pushing back some on that. They would say where they have been proactive on Iran-Saudi relations, on some of the Iraq. So, Ambassador, this is not to push back on you. You said I'm just channeling the different views that I've heard during this visit and prior visits. I think whether it is those or the tense relations between the Kurdistan regional government and Baghdad over the simple thing, paying the salaries of public servants, whether it is the national budget, it comes to the fundamental internal disagreement on the interpretation of the Constitution and the powers and the authorities of the different branches of government. That remains to be a fundamental difference that unless that is resolved, Iraq's political stability will remain a question for the foreseeable future, domestically and externally. Second, where is that influenced? Right now, the biggest influencer of that is because of the numbers, in the Shia community, and who represents in a decision-making capacity the Shia authority is the coordination framework. And the coordination framework has a current different balance of power between its different actors. In this coming elections, Prime Minister Soudani hopes that he would have a larger number of seats. Ambassador Rand Rahim mentioned the expectations of 40 to 50 seats in his camp, and probably those who hope that he will do really well talk about 80. I think we have seen these kind of excitements in the past, and they landed not so well. So I think tempering those expectations would be important. Other moderates, like Sayyid Ammar al-Hakim, if those two get a higher number of seats today, they could help in tempering and moderating Iraq's domestic politics and external politics. Obviously, somebody like former Prime Minister Abadi is not running in this election. And he said this election has money, political money, and weapons have a strong influence, and he just boycotted. And there are others who are boycotting. So in terms of policy, it will not be the constituency that come to the government that bring new ideas. It is the constituency that is already in government that may have a different balance of power that may behave differently. And I conclude with this, even if this current constituency or electoral balance does not change, let's look at recent developments. There was a time where some hawks, conservatives, groups in Iraq would not negotiate on an inch when they were confronting the United States or certain government policies. But we've seen in this short amount of time the withdrawal of the PMF laws, related laws. We have seen that the U.S. pressure affecting the paying of salaries before the elections. So there are certain indicators that tell us that external pressure could influence the same group without a single change in the formulation. Behavior could change. And that behavior is changing because of the more assertive U.S. policy, but also a contextual change in the region, being Iran being on the retreat. The Iraqis would tell you the influence of Iran in Iraq has not changed a bit. It is less visible, and it is exercised more quietly. What will that be in the next government? It really depends. if there is more confrontation with Iran, if there is an agreement of sorts that the Iraqi soil will not be the battleground for that. So these are open questions. I don't think we can predict. We'll just have to wait for time to answer them.
Jen?
I would not dare to opine on the domestic politics in that my esteemed colleagues will have a much better feel for that. But I would like to speak a little bit to what that all means for the foreign policy. And Sarhang is correct. You know, there was a degree of frustration within the U.S. government over some of, I would say, the lack of strategy and consensus and how to approach foreign policy and in a lot of ways how to approach, I guess, broader economic development. So not necessarily domestic politics, but marrying up what the political class could see the objectives were long term and what the strategy was for reaching them. And if I can give an example, you know, I think that there is general consensus, insofar as consensus exists, around the idea of the need for additional investment in Iraq. At the same time, however, there are political differences between the KRG and federal Iraq that complicate the ability of companies to do business. That complicate the ability of companies to get the assurances that they need or the resources because of disputes like that. There have been perpetual problems with payment of companies for services that have been rendered, et cetera. And so there's this strategic vision way out there about the need to get additional investment in, and not just from American companies, but Western companies writ large. And I would argue most critically from Gulf countries that are able to contribute to things like healthcare, education, and those sectors that so desperately need investment. But at an operational level, that coordination has been lacking. And so there has not been a mechanism in which to advance those strategies to a point that attracts the I guess, confidence of the international community. And so, you know, I think Sarhang is correct that it's really hard to answer today how you overcome that challenge. But I do think that will be a critical task for the new government to take on. How you can marry all of these different strategies, how you can marry all of these different objectives across Iraq into a cohesive strategy for economic development and for the implementation of foreign policy. And I would caution that if you look across the region at Lebanon, for example, you know, that inability to coordinate across political groups, et cetera, has really hampered the long-term success. Iraq has an ability to overcome that now before that becomes too entrenched. But we haven't seen yet how that can happen. So I think that, you know, the likely protracted government formation process is likely to be a hindrance to that. But I do hope on the other side of it that there can be a real discussion about what national reconciliation looks like and how you put some of these real fundamental differences aside in a way that maybe moderates positions in order to move forward.
Thank you, Jen, for that. I just want to quickly add something on the issue of payment, also salary. From 2014 until now, the Iraqi government has paid the KRG only 20% of its budget so far. And in the past, the issue or the excuse was that the KRG was, you know, the oil exportation. And as you know, March 2023, oil exportation was stopped. And then now the KRG has given the oil to SOMO, to the Iraq's marketing organization to sell, but still the salary of August 2025 has not been paid because the Iraqi government has not sent the KRG's budget. Ambassador, we're almost out of time. I would like to pose, you know, one final question for all the speakers. How do you see the future Iraqi government? Do you think this election is going to impact any change in the term of the makeup of the future government, or we are going to see the same faces of potentially the same parties that are currently governing Iraq are going to govern again?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, I have no doubt that the government formation process is going to be fraught and prolonged. And last year, as you pointed out, it took a year between elections and the formation of the government, because we also have to pick a president and then pick the nominated prime minister. And if the past is anything to go by, the coordination framework will be nominating the prime minister, and the Kurds and the Sunnis really don't get into it. They probably have veto power, but the coordination framework is so divided upon itself, and there are so many contenders, either personal contenders or people who want their party to have the premiership, that I think it is going to be prolonged. Is it going to produce a different government? I mean, there are always different faces. I mean, there's only one prime minister who has gotten 2 terms so far, Maliki. Nobody else has. So will Soudani get a second term? I don't know. The likelihood is, even if Soudani takes the premiership, there will be a reshuffle in the ministerial portfolio. The more relevant thing, I think, is, will there be any changes in policy? And my sense actually is, and this is a sort of an optimistic note, because I think many of the things I was saying are a bit pessimistic. Optimistically, I do see that in Iraq, the political parties, the Shia, the Sunnis, the Kurds, others, have become much more attuned to the fact that they are in a changing region, in a changing environment, and that they cannot be the only man out. Everybody's moving forward. Iraq is the only place that has not evolved sufficiently to keep pace with the evolution in the region. And just one note: if you compare the attention that Iraq had in 2024, the very glamorous visit of Prime Minister Soudani to Washington, the meeting with Biden, and I won't say neglect, but the relegation of Iraq to second-tier status in 2025, while everything else was going on in the region, I think Iraqi politicians have become sensitized to that, and really about time too. But I get the feeling from talking to people, from seeing their actions, that they feel they need to evolve. And if anything, if there is some evolution in Parliament, and I think there will be, then I also think there will be an evolution, not just in faces, but in the way of thinking of the new government. They'll be much more responsive to the evolving environment around them. I certainly hope so.
Thank you. Dr. Sarhang, your thoughts?
Yeah, I kind of answered some of that in my previous interjection, which is to me, the mechanics of the elections at this point is really secondary. It's the behavior that matters. What is the change, if any? I am not seeing any indication of the constitutional gridlocks being resolved. And if you do not address those, a recipe for stability was not there. You may have periods of political calm, but not stability. So that I do not see the next government right now having the ingredients for something like that. Mr. Nechirvan Barzani, Sayyid Ammar al-Hakim, and others do say that it is important and needs to be done. But unless a serious effort develops after, I do not see a significant change at that level. Then more smaller policy issues compared to that big frame. It really depends on the U.S. involvement. Right now, as we've said, a small issue in a society, paying your public servants should not be a national dispute. And it is in Iraq as such, where President Biden and his administration found himself working at that level. President Trump and his team found themselves working at that level. So that tells you the bureaucracy is gridlocked across the chain. So for those kind of change to happen, it will be that external pressure that the U.S. Is involved and pushes, not intervenes in the way that the Iraqis wish that the U.S. would come and form governments and pick prime ministers and does this to Iran and does this to that. No, not in that. It's just at least to keep the conversation going that this is important. You need to move it forward. Those things, I think, as I said, it is how the balance of power within the Shia community changes through the coordination framework will be a determinant of what change do you see. Regionally, something I want to add to what Ambassador Rand said, I think Iraq is facing a real difficulty right now in the region. The dominant issue of the time is Gaza and Gaza war and what to do with the future of the Palestinians. This Iraq has a law. It cannot deal with one side of that equation, and that is Israel. And that has imposed limitations of what Iraq can do diplomatically in that space. Second, if this Gaza deal succeeds and if a period of calm comes as a result of that, where the Abraham Accords and normalization with Israel picks up and Saudi Arabia joins that crowd, there will be a push for economic integration that may involve Israel. And this is at Iraq. Well, Iraq will face challenges because it cannot integrate with that economic. I'm not promoting that picture. I'm just explaining that is a path. If you talk to the people in the region, they say, oh, this is just a pipe dream. That kind of economic integration will not happen. The next conflict will explode before you know it. So it really depends.
Thank you. Jen, I probably should ask you one very important question. Probably you're aware President Trump appointed presidential envoy or special envoy to Iraq. His name is Mark Savaya from Michigan, originally from Iraq. How that's different from a traditional, diplomacy you have involved with, and whether that will impact the U.S.-Iraq relationship? And if you look at the Iraqi media I've been following, they think that emphasizes the importance of Iraq to this administration. That means more business, more closer Iraq-U.S. relationship. Do you have the same reading for this?
I do. Yeah, I do actually. So the Trump administration has taken a somewhat unconventional approach with the naming of special envoys, who of course do not have to be, they don't have to be confirmed by the Senate. And perhaps most critically for President Trump, they don't fall under the bureaucracy of the Department of State. And so that allows for an independence that perhaps doesn't exist with a more traditional career diplomat. And so I do think that it suggests that there is interest in this account. You can parse whether you think that interest is positive or negative. I do think that moving forward, the relationship between the U.S. and Iraq will depend very much on what position Iraq takes vis-a-vis Iran. And whether it can demonstrate sovereignty and independence from Iran while, maintaining good relations, as one would expect with a close neighbor. So I think it's important to say at the outset that will color very much how that relationship proceeds. But I do think that the naming of a special envoy suggests that the president has some degree of interest in the relationship, and not different than any of the other special envoys we've seen. He is coming out of a business background, perhaps a less conventional business than some of his colleagues, but nonetheless, I think that is positive. And I mean, frankly, if you look, there is no nominee for ambassador to Saudi Arabia. There is no nominee for ambassador to the United Arab Emirates. It is stunning as a former diplomat, given the importance of those relationships, but it's certainly something that Iraq should seize on. So I think that there are, potentially positive signs ahead. I think that the way that this relationship goes lies very much within Iraq's hands, understanding perhaps, people in this room will understand the nuances of the challenging balance that is to be made between relations with Iran and the United States. That nuance is maybe not entirely understood in all corners of Washington, and that's just something that the Iraqi government has to grapple with. I think the other thing out there that I just want to mention in closing is the announcement earlier this week that the United States would maintain a small cadre of advise and assist forces in Iraq. This is not out of sync with the Strategic Framework Agreement that was first negotiated in 2008, but I do think it's worth mentioning today because it's a departure from what we were hearing from the administration back in January and February, where there was a tendency to try to pull, as many troops as possible out of the region and certainly out of Iraq and Syria. And so I do think that it represents a commitment, an ongoing commitment across administrations to Iraq's stability, assuming that that partnership based on Iraq's preservation of its own sovereignty can be maintained. So I think it will be an eventful year. Things like the PMF law will revive once presumably there is a new government. There are things like the LGBT legislation, the normalization or the relations with Israel legislation. All of these have the potential to be real thorns in the side of the relationship. But again, ones that I think the Iraqi political establishment understands and has within their power to take decisions on that preserve that strong relationship with the U.S.
Thank you for the insightful concluding comments. I think we have time for about 2-3 questions. If you have questions, please, the mic is coming right now. And please make sure it's just a question and try to be as precise as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much. With the rise of Turkey in the region, is there a sense or a concern in Iraq that this country can sort of exert its own influence either over this election or in general political processes, especially with the influence of Iran allegedly being doubled down in Iraq to compensate for other losses in the region?
Yes, please, for anyone who wants to answer.
Yeah, I can take a stab at answering that. So the Iraqis, there are several layers to how to view Turkey. One is that it's a very powerful neighbor that the Iraqis see expanding into their own space, but also in the regional space. And as they have seen Iran. So Iraq feels there are many Iraqi leaders who say, we need a strong friend like the United States to help us with these two bigger countries, more powerful countries, so that we can maintain our independence and our sovereignty and continue to build up. So that's one layer. A second layer, there are some issues that the Iraqis have taken a sigh of relief when the leader of the PKK, Abdullah Öcalan, asked the PKK to disarm. There is a process in that disarming process. They hope that this will kind of de-escalate that issue, which has been a thorny issue in the relationship. Second is water is probably the most important piece of that relationship, where the Iraqis are transforming that relationship from one of contention to one of cooperation. They hope that by inviting Turkish companies to come and invest in the water and agriculture sector of Iraq, it will give them the incentive to get more water from Turkey and get more collaboration. The third piece is the development road that Iraq is promoting as an alternative to the Red Sea, to the IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe corridor. And now the French are kind of promoting the Banias, the Latakia connection to Basra to go through Syria. So Iraq hopes that this development road will be a transformative one with Turkey. And I've seen Turkish diplomacy being very excited about that. They're promoting that project. So today, there are more ingredients for positive cooperation, but the Iraqis are not losing sight that Turkey is a powerful country and they need other help to balance that relationship out.
Ambassador, we have 1 minute. Do you have anything to add for the question?
Sorry, are you addressing me?
Yes. We have
Yeah,
one. Is
I'm
Jen-
not sure. I didn't really hear the question properly, so I can't respond.
Yeah, it was about Iraq, Turkey relationship and its influence on Iraq. Am I right?
Yeah. I really don't have anything to add to what Sirhan was saying, except that it seems to me that in the last few years, that relationship has improved considerably. At one point, it was really contentious, and I think there has been a greater rapprochement. Just one sort of rather frivolous remark. One of Iraq's problems is that it has many neighbors, too many neighbors, and two of them are very powerful, and they are superpowers, regional superpowers. And one of Iraq's biggest challenges is trying to balance its relationships between these two superpowers. But other than that, I really have nothing to add.
Thank you, Ambassador. Iraq also has a small neighbor that we can always have fun with. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate your time that you join us for this event on Iraqi election that's going to happen on November 11th. And we're going to have food for us. Please make sure that you stay and also help yourself. Thank you so much again. Thank you. Jen, thank you, Gaksar, and thank you, Ambassador, so much for staying with us all the way from Lebanon. I really
Thank you
appreciate it.
very much for having me.
Thank you.